All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Jolene Hendricks. I'm the program manager for the commercial and non-commercial pesticide safety and environmental education program here at the University of Minnesota. I am a um, uh, remote worker, but with an office that's just not on campus. So we are in the Andover Regional Office, which houses several different extension programs. It also serves as the Anoka County Parks building. And so we are out and about most of the time, but that's where my so-called office is. And with us, we also have Gregorio Mendez Ortega, who is with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And Gregorio, I'll give you a minute to introduce yourself.
Yes, of course. Gregorio Mendez Ortega. Yes, agricultural chemical investigator. I'm housed in North Mankato. We have a small office here. That's what I'm usually. Well, that's the base. Usually, I'm out in the field. Also, with the worker protection standard, I coordinate the program here within the MDA. But we have investigators around the state, and every single one of them also conducting inspections and investigations for worker protection standard. So I just coordinate the troops and the
Excellent.
information. Mhm.
Yes, thank you so much. And so this is a partnership. These webinars are a partnership between the Department of Agriculture and the University of Minnesota Extension PSEE program in an effort to further the outreach of the worker protection standard information and to provide some compliance assistance and resources. And so we've just started these webinars last month, as a matter of fact, but the worker protection standard is not something new. It's actually been around, started in its roots in the 1970s. It was codified in 1992, and then it was most recently revised in 2015. So we're actually still talking about the revisions in 2015, trying to make sure that everybody understands the resources that are available and what changes were made. And the best way we felt to reach people in Minnesota at this time was to offer these remote opportunities and then provide some printed and digital resources. So I hope that everybody had a chance to look over the options that we have coming up. In the registration, if you registered before probably 2 weeks ago, you probably didn't get prompted to add your address into your registration for the Zoom. But all further registrations requested your address so that we can send you some printed materials. If for some reason you didn't get to enter your address during registration, or somehow along the way you're not sure if you wanted to provide your address, you are welcome to send that to me in the follow-up email as a response, and we'll make sure that we send out a wonderful package of printed materials, all kinds of goodies in there. We even threw some extra special goodies to support your efforts in your outreach. If you are representing a co-op or a larger organization and you would like materials to distribute in your area to other individuals that the WPS may apply to, please reach out to me and let me know what your resource needs might be, how many people you might be in touch with, and we can send you some bulk resources as well. Some of our MDA offices, am I right, Gregorio, that they do have some supplies, or just your office?
No, that is correct. Some offices around the state also have a small number of supplies.
Okay, so when we talk about the supplies, we'll cover some of those today. The How to Comply manual is the primary resource that we direct you to. There is a digital version of that, as well as the hard copy that we're willing to provide to you. We're going to talk about some other resources as well today. So for those of you who joined us last month, we are happy to see you again. For those of you who are new, thank you for joining us. We hope that these webinars will give you an insight to the needs of the Worker Protection Standard, which we're going to abbreviate as WPS from this point out, because that's always a mouthful to say. And then I welcome your questions throughout the webinar. So we have the chat feature, and if you're not super comfortable with Zoom, you should have a toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and there's an option for chat, or there might be 3 dots that you have to click on and get the chat function, and it will pop up a little white box, and it's just like texting. So you click in the message part, you type in your answer or your question, and you have to hit send or go or click on the send to send it through to me. So feel free to use that throughout the entire webinar, or you can save your questions for the end, or you can raise your hand and we'll be happy to let you unmute and ask your question that way as well. Please don't be shy. So another thing, if you're not as familiar with Zoom, once I share my screen, people are going to shift. Don't be alarmed. As long as you can hear my voice and see the screen that I'm sharing, you should be in good shape. If something dramatic happens, just let me know. We'll see if we can quickly troubleshoot that for you. All right, so right now I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to look at today's flyer. So last month, I didn't have this prepared beforehand, but I was able to send it out. And my goal is to send this out every week, one, so that you have a recap of what we covered in case you're keeping track of that. But it's also going to have a couple of different links on there for you. The first link is going to be for our webinar evaluation. So we do ask for some feedback following this webinar, and this is a completely new program for us in Minnesota. So really trying to make sure that every event is fruitful, it's valuable to you, you're getting the answers to the questions that you want to ask, and that you're well aware of how to connect with us. So we ask you to fill out that very short evaluation by clicking on that link. The other is my email address. So again, if you have any other questions following our events here or at any time, you're welcome to email me directly. The next one, which didn't underline in here, but pesticideresources.com is the source of digital resources, and I will demonstrate that today as well. And then the last one is if you want to directly register for the next session. So I'll always include the link, the date, and the topic for the next session webinar. I can't believe it's already been a month, Gregorio. It feels like it was just like a week ago we did this, and then the month went by. So you can register at any time all the way up until the start of the meeting. So we want you to have that at your fingertips. So let's get started with defining worker and handler. So if you were with us last week, and I'm going to stop sharing this document, and I'm going to move over to the How to Comply manual, which is in digital form here. And again, if you provide your mailing address to us, we will send you a packet of information which will include a hard copy of this, but this is always available to download for free, and we'll go over those resources toward the end. So the How to Comply manual covers a lot of the definitions that you need to be familiar with. And so last month we talked about workers and handlers, but if you navigate through this manual, it's got a great table of contents. And there's this section determining your WPS responsibilities. And then here's a section here. Are you a worker? Whoops. I jumped too far. Now I got to go back up. That's the wonderful thing about digital resources. Tend to have a mind of their own. Back to the table of contents. Okay, so I won't click on this. So are you a worker employer, a handler employer, or both? And then there's also the actual definitions of workers and handlers in that same section. So today we're going to be talking about the training requirements, and that's going to be found later on in the section. So chapter 3 will cover training agricultural workers. Chapter 4 is training pesticide handlers. Now, one thing to keep in mind about this How to Comply manual is it's a shortcut to the very large, cumbersome federal regulation. The book was designed to get you to the information as quickly as possible so that you can find out where your resources are, find out these definitions, know whether or not the WPS applies to you, but not everything is detailed in this book. So for instance, your decontamination requirements are briefly listed here, but there's a longer version of that in the actual Federal Registry. And that's another reason why we want to do these WPS webinars where we're talking about just a single subject each time, so we can dive a little deeper into some of these, the most needed and necessary parts for most people. So let's jump down to, are you an employer of a worker and handler? And so I think that was on page 13. The nice thing about this manual is it is written in as best to their abilities. It is written in plain language. So hopefully most of the information is very digestible. There may be some need for further explanation. Sometimes they have these little sidebars that explain another concept or a concept in a little bit more depth. They really try to be very consistent throughout the manual with the terminology and the language. And it is a little repetitious because of that reason. They want to make sure that if they're talking about handlers, they're mentioning what a handler is multiple times, not just the one time in the one page. So who has WPS responsibilities? And we talked about this last time. An agricultural employer is a person who is the owner of and manages that agricultural establishment, and they employ workers or handlers. The commercial pesticide handler employer is what we in the sort of the rest of the pesticide world call an applicator. You know, your business that employs applicators. So if you are a lawn company and you have individuals who make pesticide applications on lawns, that's a handler by WPS. Doesn't apply for WPS because they're on lawns, but if you have a crop setting and you hire a commercial outfit, so a commercial company comes in to do all your spraying on your crop, that's the commercial pesticide handler employer. And I know it's very cumbersome to say, but that's what it is. The handler is the person, whether they're self-employed or not, that actually physically performs a task using a pesticide or has some connection to a pesticide residue potential. So this would be including, and it says, see the introduction on page 4, which we'll get to. It includes mixing, loading, or applying pesticides. And there are some more detailed activities that go with that. So that would be the handler. So do you employ one or the other, or work with one or the other, or both? So you need to divide up your tasks and figure out who's doing what activities, and that's going to tell you whether they're workers or whether they're handlers, and sometimes a person might cross over between the two. The other person the other type of person that we need to be aware of is early entry workers. So early entry workers are workers under the WPS. So they are people who are going into a treated area before the restricted entry interval is expired, and it's to perform some duty. So maybe there's an irrigation line that busted in the field just got treated, the REI is still in place, and we'll talk a little bit more about this example. And so you have to have these individuals go in and fix the irrigation line. They're not doing anything with pesticides, but they have the potential for exposure. Those are your early entry workers, okay? And that's very much defined in the WPS, and it's also listed on the pesticide labels because there are maybe certain requirements for those early entry workers that don't necessarily apply to the other ones. Another thing to keep in mind is that the WPS covers general use pesticides and restricted use pesticides. So while we know that you don't necessarily need a pesticide applicator license unless you are applying restricted use pesticides, if that's on your own land. Commercially, you have to have one regardless of whether you're using general use or restricted use. But the WPS applies, again, whether you are using general use or restricted use. So even if you don't have to have a pesticide applicator license according to the state of Minnesota, by what the work that you do, if any of this applies, any of the conditions apply, you still have to comply with the WPS. All right, so in this, I'm not going to go over this, but in this manual, it does tell you what qualifies as those establishments. So some of the easy ones we know of: cornfields, soybean fields, vineyards. Those are pretty easy to identify, but there are some other types of operations that fall into establishments where the WPS needs to apply. And again, it doesn't matter whether they're using general use or restricted use, the WPS regulations still apply to that site. So make sure you review that as well. Now let's go over
Yeah, can I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
The
Go
link,
ahead.
yeah, sure. An easy way to find out whether your business or your establishment falls under the worker protection standard is just to ask a question whether your establishment is in the business of producing or growing plants for commercial or research purposes. Then, right there, worker protection standard. So that will be just a rule of thumb.
Wonderful. Thanks for jumping in, Gregorio. I've given him free reign to just pop in whenever he needs to. I think I missed the page that talked about workers and handlers. I was listening and reading simultaneously. Well, let me jump to the section, chapter 3, where I know it talks about training. Okay, so a worker, as I mentioned, is a person who is working on that establishment. The establishment has had some sort of pesticide application within 30 days. And so they're working in that area that's potentially been treated. But they're not physically handling pesticides. They're not handling pesticide equipment. They're not rinsing empty containers out to get them ready for recycling. They are doing other tasks like pruning, planting, seeding, hand pulling, weeding, working other types of machinery and equipment. They're not doing anything with pesticide applications, and they're not assisting with pesticide applications. So that is a worker. For the requirements of worker training, the nice thing is that, well, at first people didn't think it was so nice because they thought it was going to be an overburden, but EPA has a set of materials that are approved that you have to use for the training. So you don't get to make up your own training materials and train individuals in that way. Specifically for WPS. You must use the approved materials, and I'll show you where those are later in the webinar. The nice thing is there's these great videos that you can show, and so you don't have to, again, make it up from scratch. You show the videos, you're there to answer questions and moderate and make sure that they understand what they're hearing, and then you document that they've received this training. The video, I think, is like 32 minutes for workers, and then there's like an additional 10 or 12 minutes for handlers. So it's not overly cumbersome. This shouldn't take you all day for this particular purpose, but you can also incorporate whatever additional trainings that you would like to provide to those individuals during that time as well. Key thing about training workers, there's no grace period. The old regulation had a grace period so that people could start work and then at some point they can get trained. But that was one significant change in 2015. So there's no grace period for the training. It has to be done before any worker enters that treated area within the last 30 days. And they've used a WPS labeled pesticide product. And they have to ensure that they've completed this WPS training within the last 12 months. Okay, so that's as a worker. We'll talk about what it looks like to document that training and how to best provide that information to the workers in case they do move from field to field or from employer to employer. Now, the only things that the people who do not need to receive the WPS training as workers are if they are actually certified as an applicator themselves, if they have been trained as a handler within the last 12 months, and they can provide that documentation, or if they're a certified crop advisor through the official program. So you have to be like a certified CCA, certified crop advisor as part of the national organization or the state chapter of the national organization. So those are the exceptions. Your workers have to be trained every 12 months. So if they can't provide you the documentation that shows that they have been trained, then they have to go through the training again. Only qualified trainers can provide the training. And so the 3 individuals who can provide training are if a person is a certified applicator, certified pesticide handler, then they can provide WPS training. A person who is designated by the state to provide such training. So that would be, for instance, me, Gregorio, other agricultural chemical inspectors who work for the MDA, or a person who has completed the official Train the Trainer course. And I can show you where that is as well. So one of those qualifications has to be met for that person to provide training, and it has to be documented on the training record. So you'll have to provide which materials and who that person was and what their designation is in order to make that an official record. You have to provide training in a language or in a manner that can reach your audience. So this could be a combination of oral and visual aids. We have a lot of different things to work with. We have the videos, like I mentioned. We also have flip charts that you can use in the field if you, one, don't want to use digital means, or two, that is the best method to reach your particular group of workers. And they come in different languages. We have some different languages there. We also have PowerPoint presentations. So if you don't want to play a video, you just want to flip through the information and be able to answer and ask questions as you go or translate as you go, you can do that as well. So we have a variety of different materials that you can use to help make sure that the workers understand the information that they're being presented. As a trainer, or as the agricultural establishment, you must keep your training records for 2 years and provide that to any of the people who have been trained upon request. So this is where, as a trainer or person conducting the training, you want to have a means to produce that information for those workers should they go work somewhere else. Yes, Gregorio.
Also, it needs to be provided to any of the inspectors that come and inspect the site. So they have to be there on hand. And
The
that is something
records.
that the records, yes, I'm talking
Yes.
about the records, the training records, pesticide safety training records. And that is something that we really look into it very closely. We follow the thread, whether there is the person who has been provided the trainer has been providing the trainer, whether it's qualified and how it was qualified. We need to see and check the documentation. Also, what is very important as well, you mentioned it, it is that the training must be provided in a way that the worker can understand. That means they provided the training in the native language of the worker, if it is not English speaker, or using an interpreter. But it must be provided in a way that the worker can understand, and the handler, if it is going to be training handler as well. Very important as well, it is that the person who is providing the training, it must be available during the training for then the workers or handlers can't ask questions and be explain the question. That just
Yes.
wanted to mention that as well. Tom. They need to be the trainer must be in the room with them at
Yeah.
all times.
Yes, and that was one significant change in 2015 because I know I worked in my previous job. We had DVDs and we would provide the DVDs, or actually we had VHS tapes too, and we would provide those. And we know that individuals would like turn that on and then leave the room and just let the individuals watch the video and then come back and be like, any questions? And then they would move on with their day. But that was one significant change as a requirement, is the trainer must stay in the room again to be able to field questions, provide clarification, ensure that the individuals being trained understand that information. And so, it's not really a multitasking kind of situation. There was something else along those lines that I was going to mention. It'll come back to me. So yes, providing the training records to the worker employees upon request. I have some examples of worker or handler training record keeping forms, but I can tell you that EPA did not create a record keeping form. As far as I know, Minnesota does not have a specific form. The How to Comply manual tells you what you have to record. And so what I did was I just looked at some other states who took that information and put it in a form just to show you what that might look like. I would say don't use another state's form, but you can model your form after it as long as it meets their the requirements that are in the how to comply manual. Some states took that, and did it for the ease of their state so that their inspectors would know exactly what to look for when they were doing an inspection, plus to make it easier for the person who is recording the information. But it wasn't requirement for the states, so they do allow you to create your own as long as it contains all the correct information. Okay, so at this time, does anybody have questions regarding agricultural worker training? I'm going to move on to handlers, and we will go through the resources and those forms here shortly. Okay, I don't see any chats or any hands up, so I'm going to move on to the handler portion. So it's in chapter 4. All right, so chapter 4 is the handler training pesticide handler section. So again, a handler is a person who is actually working with some version of a pesticide or anything that might be contaminated by pesticide. So you're talking about the application equipment. So even the person who's cleaning application equipment is a handler according to the WPS. If you have empty jugs and you're preparing them for recycling or for disposal and you're triple rinsing or power rinsing those jugs, that person is also a handler. If they are applying the pesticides, mixing and loading trucks, all of those duties, and there is a page earlier in the how to comply that explains all of those duties. That is a handler. So they must also receive training unless they are already a certified pesticide applicator. So anybody who has a pesticide applicator's license, that's a certified applicator. Or if they, even in the private, if you're a private landowner and you are certified as a restricted use pesticide applicator, that is also the same certification. So whether you're doing it commercially and you have a pesticide license or you have a private applicator certification, those would qualify. You do not have to have additional WPS training. Again, there's no grace period. So if a person is being asked to do these duties, they must receive the training before being asked to do any of those duties. Pretty much everything else is the same. They have to be trained as a handler every 12 months. So it overlaps the worker training, but then there's some additional components that they have to be trained on. Again, only qualified trainers can provide the training. It still has to be in a language or a manner that they can understand. You have to use the EPA approved materials, keep the training records for 2 years, provide those training records to the employees upon request, and keep those records for 2 years I mentioned. So there's really no difference in the process. It's more or less deciding who qualifies as a worker and who qualifies a handler. I'd say if you had to kind of rank them, a handler is more involved, so it doesn't do you harm to train everybody as a handler if you wanted to. And that way, if they are a worker, but then you needed them last minute to switch duties, they're already trained as a handler. But that's really a business process that you can evaluate. But the handler is like the next level above a worker. So there would be more information provided to them, and then they would be qualified to do any of the tasks that you might need from them. So any questions on the pesticide handler training? All right, seeing no hands and no chats, I'm going to stop share here. And I'm
I'm
going
gonna
to
jump
go.
in again.
Yes, go ahead, Gregorio.
Okay, yeah, for the training, I use for the whoever's keeping the track with the new with the revised 20 version of worker protection standard. Uh, the handler must receive, I believe there are 23 items that are specific. They must be trained. Uh, and for the worker protections to be in compliance, and for the handlers are 36 items that are considered that must be addressed during the training. And these items, one of the reasons they must be is because they are codified in the Code of Federal Regulations. So those are a must. Otherwise, it will be a violation of the law.
Great. Thank you, Gregorio. All right, so I'm going to switch over here. In the chat, make sure my chat's doing what I want it to do. I just put in the chat the website that I'm going to bring up on the screen. And this is where you will find the required training materials. All right, so hopefully everybody can see this web page. So this is pesticideresources.org. It is the Pesticide Educational Resources Collaborative. This was an EPA grant that went out. It was a collaboration with University of California, Davis, and Oregon State University, OSU, to develop educational materials for pesticide applicator training or for pesticide outreach, because it's not all just for applicators. But this is where all of the WPS materials are housed. Now, as you can see on this front page, it seems like everything here is WPS. And so that is the front page, but they do produce other materials as well that are not WPS related. So we do have some national manuals, national study manuals. We also have some specialty products for certain industry. So sometimes you have to get past this main page to get to the other materials. They pretty much have the WPS right in the forefront here. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the materials for training trainers, because if you are not a certified applicator or a designated of the state, the only way that you could provide training is to take the Train the Trainer course. And so there is an online course that you can take. There's a web-based training for training of agricultural workers and handlers that you can take. There's also a study manual, although I don't really know. Locally, we don't have a Train the Trainer program established yet. But that is something that I'm looking at providing. So if that is of an interest to you to have like an in-person Train the Trainer, send me a note and just let me know. Don't know that we would pull it together anytime soon, but it's good to know if there's a demand out there for people in Minnesota. Otherwise, you can take the online course, you get a certificate, it gives you an approval number, and that's what you will put on your documentation for your training records when you provide training to handlers or workers. So that's the materials for training trainers. We're going to go back home here, and then we have the training videos for workers and handlers. But then we also have this very generalized training materials section. So I'm actually going to go there. I'm going to go to the inventory. And you'll see that there are a lot of things in this table. At this point, there's 154 items. So here's the curriculum again for delivering Train the Trainer. Here's the manual for the training. There's some other, again, things that support the work that we do that's not necessarily WPS related. So here's one about spray quality and droplet size. We do have some second language resources as well. So we do have some Spanish versions of a lot of these things. We have a dictionary of terms, and that is what we're using to ensure that all of our materials are consistent when they're translating. So we know that there's a lot of dialects in Spanish, for instance. And in order for our materials to stay with the same voice, we have a dictionary of terms so that you know, like when this term is used, this is what it's interpreted as, in case your dialect thinks differently or you would use a different word in your dialect. There are also, I wanted to find yes. So we also have some that are specific to different industry. So for instance, we have ones that are specific to forestry. We have, I know we have like mushroom, greenhouse, orchard. There is a couple other ones in here. Okay, I won't go much. Here we go. Mushroom here, nursery here. So some of these other ones are also WPS trainings that are designed for those specific industries if you happen to be, if that's your target audience. All right, so I'm going to go back home here and go back to just this one, which is the training videos for workers and handlers. And that'll narrow that list down a little bit. So here we have the training videos. We will in the future have these available in high res on flash drives that we can give out, but this last year has been a big challenge for the supply chain. So we're still waiting on getting those because the videos are so large that we have to have very large flash drive capacity. So we're still waiting on those, and that may be a resource that we'll have and be able to hand out. Otherwise, they are downloadable or you can just watch through streaming. So we have English and Spanish version. For instance, this is the training video for workers, and you can either watch it on YouTube, and that way, you know, like if you have an actual connection to the internet, you can just watch it on YouTube. It doesn't take up any space on your device. Or if you want to use it for future, save it for future reference, like you're going to put it on your laptop and then go show it, you know, in a small group setting that doesn't have internet access, you can actually download it and then play it on your device. So we have different versions. There's workers, there's handlers. We also have ones with closed captioning. And these are all free. There's no charge for any of this. And you can use it as many times as you need to. I will just pull up the YouTube version just to give you a glimpse of what that is going to look like. There's always a little bit of advertisement. Don't think you can hear the sound on that, but I'll at least let you see how this plays out. All right, I'm going to see if I can get the video sound to play. I know there's a setting that I have to do. Give me a second. Here we go. Gregorio, just give me a thumbs up when I play it. See if you can hear the sound.
The WPS is a federal regulation,
Perfect.
and it is important to note that some states or tribes may have pesticide regulations in addition to the federal WPS covered here. This regulation is designed to protect agricultural employees by reducing the possibility of work-related pesticide exposure and illness. You will be informed about the pesticide hazards you may find at your work site and be shown the steps you can take to protect yourself, your family, or others from pesticide exposure. You will also learn the steps you can take if you or someone else is affected by pesticides and understand your employer's responsibilities for employees who work in areas where pesticides are used. The WPS requires agricultural employers to inform and train their workers in pesticide safety once a year. Your employer must keep a copy of your training on file for 2 years, and you have the right to request a copy of it during this time.
Okay, so I just wanted to give you a taste of what that looks like. So the video here is like 22 minutes long, I believe. And then there's again, the handler version is the same video plus some additional information at the end. So it's relatively painless. If you notice at the very beginning, the screen had an EPA approval number for the document. That is a requirement to put on the training record. And so let's go to look at what one of those might look like. So I pulled one from Washington. They have a very, very robust WPS training program. This was their training verification record. And like I said, I wouldn't use one from another state specifically, but you can certainly model the information on your own form. And you can see here where it says trainers qualifications. You have to either put down your certification number or your pesticide license number, and then your expiration date when you're certified. And then when you do the training materials section, you have to list the title, the source, and you can use PERC, pesticideresources.org, the title. So what was the title of the video or the PowerPoint or whatever it was that you used, the description, and that approval number to ensure that you did use an approved material for the training. And then you can do your verification recording as the employee's name, whether they were trained as a worker or a handler or both, and they sign here. And then this is the record that the agricultural establishment maintains to provide proof to the individual that they were trained and to provide to the inspectors when during the WPS inspection. Gregorio, would you like to add anything else to this?
Yeah, so very important is a record keeping, of course, the date when they receive the training, because that is going to be the base for whether it's going to be for the next cycle, 12 months, or they need to be retrained. So that's a very important piece of information, the date.
Yes. So we assume in most cases, you're not going to be training one person at a time. You generally have a group gathering and you train people in groups. So the way this form was set up is like you are training, again, the agricultural employer on this date. So it's assumed that everybody on this list is being trained at the same time on the same date. And again, that's where if your business processes say differently and you are training people one-on-one, then you'll probably want a form where the column indicates this information per individual. And then there's a specific date for that individual as opposed to a group setting. So that's why, again, Minnesota also doesn't produce training records because you really should design it for whatever your situation is.
That is correct, and we see both situations, whether they're at a group that is being trained or was trained when they arrive before previous to entering a trade area, or new hires as they come. That's so it is at fine either way, as long as the information is there.
So Gregorio, I have a point of clarification. If you go to an establishment for an inspection and let's say there's 5 individuals and 3 of them are licensed or certified applicators, what kind of documentation do you usually ask the agricultural establishment for, or do you just grab their names and go look them up on the MDA website?
If they are working and they're going to be applying, they must have their card, license card, if they are certified or licensed applicators. For every time that if they are going to be a name as trainers, the information, the license number must be also in the record keeping as well. And if they we can also check behind the scenes if we have the name and we have that whether they're going to be commercial or non-commercial, or they're the private. We can check in our database as well. So we have different ways to get that information. Most of the time it is on site, and they will have their card. Because remember, it has to be, in order to be a qualified trainer or not in need of further trainer, it has to be current, the license.
Right. Okay, so are there any questions about where to find the training materials or the requirements that we've covered so far? Everyone is a very quiet group today, but I forgive you, it's Monday. All right, so let's see, on our agenda, the last thing I was going to cover,
Yeah, let me jump in here just to get a little more information on the
Yes.
training and the training materials. We have encountered some situations in which the firm, the business, wanted to develop their own training material, and that is okay, and they can develop, but it must be approved by EPA prior to using it. My is suggestion on those and recommendations on those instances is just use specific to their business. But that is, well, it is allowed to do that. But all the information that must be provided is already there, and just adding the specifics of the firm. Then doesn't have
Perfect.
to be approved again.
Yes, and if you know how government works, it is a slow cog of wheels. So just know that if you are looking to develop your own training materials and get that EPA approval, it can take a considerable amount of time, especially since there are so many resources already available. Really can't tell you what it would be on their priority list, but it's certainly not something that's going to be turned around. You know, you started at the beginning of a season, you're going to wait. You know, I wouldn't uh, put all your eggs in that basket. So utilize the resources that are already provided to you as applicable. If you do need something that's very specific to your group of individuals for some reason, you can go through that EPA approval process as well. Okay, well, believe it or not, we've actually covered everything that I had on the agenda, but I did want to show you a few of the resources. So I had Gregorio go grab some stuff out of his stash. So first is the How to Comply manual. So this is the physical manual that we have in the digital version. And again, if you provide your address to us, this will be one of the items that you receive in your packet in the mail. And then the other item, which we're going to talk about in a future EPA webinar, I'm sorry, WPS webinars, is the central poster, central posting poster. This is the small version, but we also have the larger 24 by 36 size as well. There we go. Yep. And so they made these central posting posters. It's very similar to like your workplace employee rights posters, you know, that you usually have up in your break rooms and whatnot. It has some specific information to fill in about the closest emergency place, like hospital or clinic or whatever that you would need if somebody was exposed and needed some immediate attention. So there's a spot for you to fill that information in. There's also directives about what to do with your dirty PPE, where, how to make sure that you have good personal hygiene, and go throughout your day. So those posters are also included in the packets. The small ones are. I have several different versions. Most of them are laminated, so you can write on them and then erase it and write again in the future. And I do have multiple languages, and I will be very honest with you to tell you that some of the languages I actually don't know. So when I look at the poster, I don't know which language it is. It doesn't say, hey, this is English and Hmong. It just has it in the two languages. So if you have an example of a language that you're looking for, I can go through our arsenal and see if we have a match for it. But those are also available on the pesticide resources.org site as well. You can download them, you can go get them printed yourself, or there's a place that directs you to purchasing those if you need them in a significant quantity. So at this time, I'm going to spend the last few minutes just opening it up for questions or feedback. Feel free to turn your camera on and just let us see who you are, or you don't have to. But we're here to answer a few questions if you want to. Otherwise, like I said, following this meeting, you will get an email that has the agenda for today, the workshop, the resource link, as well as the evaluation link. And I really appreciate any feedback that you can give us for today's webinar so we can plan for future webinars.
Here, also, can I just jump in here again?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to grab another small handbook it is also available. This is just a summary of what they have to comply manually. So this might be a little more practical to have it with you, and this will give you the basics. And then if you want to increase, you need more, then you know where to look
Yes,
for, and they have to comply manual.
and we threw those in the packets as well. Okay, so we did
Mhm.
have a couple of questions, or at least one question. How often does a trainer need to take the train the trainer?
Great question. Once you have been trained, it will stay there forever. The reason for that is that every time that you provide a training, you are refreshing the knowledge. That is what that is the reasoning. But once you take the trainer course, that's it. You're set
I'd
for
say
life.
that the one exception would be is if they decide to do some sort of revision again to the regulation, and then
That
they
is
would
correct.
direct people, but I don't see
Mhm.
that happening anytime soon. They've got enough fish to fry, and at this point, this was a major undertaking to get the 2015 updates done. I don't really foresee them trying to tackle any changes anytime soon, but and then Antonio asked, where can we access the recorded session? So great question. I will eventually post it on the PSEE YouTube channel, and there is a link. There will be a link to that YouTube channel in the email that I send following this as well. Now, when it will get there, I'm not exactly sure. I'm really hoping that maybe by the end of next week, I'll have everything updated for the 2 webinars that we provided. That's my goal. But you will have a link to access that. Any other questions? All right. Well, seeing none, I feel like I can give you back a few minutes of your day today since it is Monday. Again, you'll have my email address and some other contact information. If any questions do come up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to assist you in any way possible. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And at this time, I'm going to stop recording.